a lived piece. He knows it now. Memory is really important. Come in and let's spend a day celebrating and talking about which memories we choose. And I'm always surprised which ones my parents, for example, choose to share in the context of this day. Which are the memories or the stories that you want to pass on that really define who you are or define your childhood? We selectively remember our past, and that happens for lots of reasons and in lots of ways. But we spoke in that first class that this is really a Jewish value. The value of making memory central, making time for memory, and the Pesach Seder being the kind of centerpiece of that memory enterprise where all generations, right, come together and in all these ways really make sure that the memory of these events does not evaporate and become central to who we are. The other piece that we developed in the first class is that this story of Egypt leaving, for lack of a better word, is a key narrative of the Jewish people. And we noticed that it's not only important on Pesach, it's important throughout the entire year. And in fact, some of those sources in the first packet, some of which we looked at, some of which we didn't, show how all the Nevi'im and later thinkers, and we even saw, remember, Martin Luther King, pick up on the Exodus narrative as the central way to tell our story. Whether or not we're talking about leaving Egypt, Egypt is the touchstone. We also spoke about how telling our story, in this case of leaving Egypt, has the quality of helping us learn who we are. It's at the core of our values, of who we want to be, and who we want to help ourselves from being. Remember, we spoke about how many of the mitzvot that have leaving Egypt as the reason, or you should do this so because you left Egypt, or so you remember you left Egypt, have the quality of really teaching us how to be appropriate in a social kind of way, learning not to be oppressors, really making sure that we, at the best of our ability, live in a world without inequality. We also developed that this storytelling, the reason why perhaps it works, or the reason why it has central role in our lives, is because it has a purpose. And that purpose we debated. I made an argument what I thought the purpose was of telling the story, what I just mentioned about seeing ourselves as responsible and caring citizens. But there are other purposes that we experience among our families, if you recall a few weeks ago. But for sure, the telling of the story has a purpose, and that's what makes it so vibrant. We also talked about how telling history is never neutral. We tell our stories, again, for a reason, and even when we think we are, quote, just telling a story, there's usually some kind of message. There's usually some takeaway, whether it has a practical piece or not. But again, we choose to tell the stories, and the ways we tell them indicates a lot about our mindset and our values and our aspirations for the listeners of that story. Last week we spoke specifically about ceremonies and how ceremonies are a particular way of staging, as it were, a particular story and making vibrant and clear. Remember that quote we looked at from Hanselman, that what's different about a ceremony or a public event or a commemorative event is that it, number one, isolates that moment in time from the rest of mundane living, and the values and the ideas that a ceremony can communicate are crystal clear in a way that actual life is not. And so a ceremony, if it's going to be a history-telling or a storytelling ceremony, will be particularly poignant in terms of making an impression on the listeners. And states and institutions know that and craft ceremonies in such a way that those values and messages will really come across. If we bring Pesach to the commemorative event, and now we're getting closer to our actual topic of today, which is Yom HaZikaron, we know that part of what will make it impactful and meaningful for participants are some of the elements that we saw in Pesach. Number one, multiple generations being involved. Number two, multiple senses, full body experience, right? Number three, the fact that, and we implicitly said this, the fact that you know at your Seder that everybody or most people in your orbit are doing the same thing, maybe at a different time if they're in another country, but they're participating in the same basic ritual and the same basic rite is also what gives its impact. And so even on Yom HaZikaron, we know that what's very important is what's going on in that ceremony for our students, but the fact that all their friends are doing it, and the fact that students tell us when they get to Israel in their year or later, and they say, oh, that's why we did that, right? Because that's what they do in Israel. And the sense of shared purpose and shared storytelling, it almost, sorry?
Community.
Community, it multiplies the meaning and multiplies the impact of the ceremony itself in its local sense. Last week, I shared with you a little bit of the history of the Yom HaZikaron ceremony, that originally it was a piece of Yom HaAtzmaut, and later it was separated out as its own day at the request of bereaved parents. And just in our discussion about Yom HaZikaron, and you wrote what you think the goals are. Apologize for those who are watching on the screen. It was very quiet in the room for a few minutes, but everybody here shared, based on their experiences or their aspirations, what Yom HaZikaron has meant. We saw very well around this table that there are many different stakeholders in the Yom HaZikaron ceremony. What I mean by that is, depending where you are in your life and what your experiences have been, and we all, in a certain way, shared pieces of that. At the ceremony, many people care about what is happening there. Many different people come in with different reasons. It's a loaded event. And so talking about Yom HaZikaron, which is what we're doing today, and taking a closer look at what goes on in a ceremony is, by definition, difficult, and not a shared kind of equal conversation. What I want to talk to you about today is specifically, as an example, what we do in this school, how we have crafted our Yom HaZikaron ceremony, not for the purpose of praising or criticizing, but actually for the purpose of noticing and trying to figure out what the messages are that the kids might be getting, how we're packaging them, perhaps what other messages they might be getting that we're unaware of, and then to bring it all back to the question that we asked last week, which is, could we figure out how Yom HaZikaron, and by the way, Yom HaAtzmaut needs to be in this conversation because they go together, could these days be a place where our kids will be able to answer that question, how can I be more responsible for Israel? Yeah, jump in, go ahead.
So will we also be able to talk about, or at least touch on, how we prepare people to make the transition from Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaAtzmaut?
Yeah. Now,
That's like
good.
the biggest transition we're asked to make, I think, in the whole entire year.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting you mention that, because in Israel, that ceremony of transition is really central to the day. And that's where my understanding is, that's where many people gather in their shuls and in other places to have a tekes ma'avar, right, of really being squarely in Yom HaZikaron and then spending time together when it's already, the time has passed, and you come outside to the street. And I've heard people speak about this. You come in, it's silent, and you're in, when Yom HaZikaron is still happening, the streets are very quiet, you go into your place, right, those of you who have been there, you're in the day of Yom HaZikaron, and when you come to the public again, it's a transformed landscape. We don't do that here as much. I mean, I do think actually where I live, there was something communal celebration, but certainly in the school, Yom HaZikaron is on its own, and Yom HaAtzmaut is on its own. Logistically, it's probably because we're here in the morning, and that's when we do the ceremony.
But how do you prepare people to be able to make
Okay,
that? Yeah.
good. Yes, we'll come back to that. Yeah.
I just want to tell you, because when I was in Israel, not when I was a student, because that was in the 60s, it was too late, but when I first moved to Israel, it was a very weird, there was no preparation. You sat there, you were in the streets of Yerushalayim, very quiet, you heard the mournful, you got the shofar, and suddenly all the lights went on in the city. All the lights. And there were sparklers going on, and it was like, your head was not, you didn't even know where to be.
Right.
I don't know if they still do that, because I know by the time I left Israel, they were not doing that anymore. It was like too much of a jarring experience. It was really solemn, dark. There was a shofar tekiyat, and then suddenly, literally, all the lights in the city went on at one time. And I was told that's what happened throughout the country. It was dark, and suddenly the lights went on. Very weird sensation.
So what you're already bringing into the room both of your questions, and I'm sort of taken aback. I hadn't thought about talking about that because it doesn't happen here in the school. But in a way, our students, okay, and I'm making a generalization, but this is based on my conversations with kids, they don't have that same need for a transitional ceremony, because the way Yom HaZikaron is experienced here, and we'll get there soon, it's a 1-hour tekes that we have in the auditorium, and throughout the day pretty much proceeds as normal. Yom HaShoah is not that way. Yom HaShoah here, it's the whole day. You know, the assembly is many, many hours, and then throughout the day, Rabbi Harkstark recites names of family members. It in no way feels like a normal day. It's actually quite difficult to teach, and then all of a sudden, you start hearing names on a loudspeaker, and then you, in some capacity, go back to where you were. It's a day apart. Yom HaZikaron doesn't feel that way, and sometimes teachers and students will say, why not? It should be a day apart. We need more. Now, that's part of where I'm getting. One of my knee-jerk reaction to that is, yes, you're right, maybe, but it's a lot for kids. And it's a lot to have 2 days, 1 week apart, where it's unbearably sad. Now, in Israel, it's a different conversation. Not that you don't have a choice about it. Yom HaZikaron is not a regular day in any capacity. There is no school in the afternoon, so they don't have this particular question about what to do in the classroom. But the lived reality of Yom HaZikaron is different here, right? And we actually have to start, as a starting point, we have to be okay with that. We have to accept that. Does that mean we say, okay, whatever you do, it doesn't matter? No, I'm not saying that. But we should already begin with the conversation with the recognition that our students don't, shouldn't, can't experience Yom HaZikaron the way that it's experienced in Israel. And then the question becomes, so what do we want them to experience? What are the goals, right? One way of thinking about it is, well, we want to do as much as possible to make them feel as close as possible to what the experience is like in Israel. Now, there are many reasons why you might want that. You might want that, well, actually, let me ask you, why would that be a goal, if you think that's actually the goal? To make this as close as possible to what it feels like in Israel. And if that were the goal, we shouldn't just have an hour ceremony. We should try to transform the whole day. Why might that be the thinking behind Yom HaZikaron here? Yeah, Ronnie. Yeah, go ahead.
We talked about it in terms of Passover. It's that sort of universality, a sense of community is what, one of the words people use, that the same thing is happening in many places around the world, so it's connectivity to all Jews.
Okay.
Particularly Jews in Israel.
Okay. So if we wanted our kids to feel, I wish I had a board, I want to collect this, but if we wanted our kids to feel as close and connected to their peers in Israel, or even better, just part of one fabric, right? So we actually want their experience to be as closely aligned to what's happening in Israel.
Klal Yisrael.
Klal Yisrael. It should be a day, okay? It should be a day, and by the way, if our goal is that Klal Yisrael should be reinforced, that might not lead us to the conclusion that our Yom HaZikaron should be just like in Israel. And I'll get there in a minute. Yeah, what were you going to say, Margaret?
No, I was just going to say, because that's where the loss is most keenly felt. So you want people to tie people, for people to feel the empathy of, or some sense of what people are feeling in Israel, because that's where the loss is.
Okay, so we want to be as close to the loss. If the day is organized around loss, we don't have that immediate experience, and so we want our kids, right? But you see, it's actually harder to say it than you think, right? We want our kids to know that loss. No, we don't want our kids to know that loss. We want our kids to have empathy. Can you look at my box for a minute? Because I had a lot of trouble when I was doing this paper. I asked myself, what are our goals? And I came up with a list. This is on maybe page 3 if you have the full packet, or on page 1 if you have the new one from today. It's a box that's just it's all my ideas. I wrote here, what are our goals? To teach kids about specific people who have died. That could be, actually it's a day where we can't talk about everybody because, right, unfortunately 24,000, more than 24,000, but maybe the point of Yom HaZikaron in the diaspora should be to learn about specific people we've lost and gain appreciation for who they were and to mourn the loss of their lives. To access the extent of suffering that Israelis face as a result of wars and terrorism. Right? That's similar to what you said, to access the extent that could be understood as maybe an exercise in empathy, or American kids living here don't really have a clue. They don't really have an understanding of what Israelis, like you said, Deborah, last week, what parents must feel like. So maybe Yom HaZikaron for you said it's actually a day where you tap into that and you gain appreciation and respect almost, or I don't know, right, for the sacrifice. Maybe it's to feel sadness about what has been lost, or to feel pride that we're able to defend ourselves. Maybe it's a day to connect with the overarching narrative of the Jewish people, surely like you said, Klal Yisrael. Maybe it's to grow more aware of the sacrifices that their Israeli peers make, to strengthen the relationship between our students and Israel, or to help shape their sense of themselves as Jews living in the 21st century. I don't know about you, but when I read that out loud now, I feel confused. right? There's actually a lot of options as to how Yom HaZikaron could be organized. And these are not, some of these are emotional goals, and some of these are cognitive goals, right? So the first level that I suggest in my paper is to kind of make a choice, not between one or the other, because as we said from Pesach, part of what makes it work is the combination. There's an emotional piece, there's a cognitive piece. But we can't do everything. And so which are the most important ones? And the day would be shaped very differently if the objective was to feel sadness or if the objective was to strengthen the relationship. Okay, see where I'm headed?
Yeah.
All right, 1 minute. I just want to say one more thing, and then
One more thing. You've got to realize the difficulty, because in Israel, all the kids know somebody who's lost somebody. Their neighbor, their teachers, their people. They literally know people who have lost people, and they can see the impact on lives. And here, you don't have that, thank God. So there's a limit to how much you can make kids here understand that. It's hard enough for adults to understand it, but we're more involved with death than we realize. And with the kids, it's not a concept.
right?
You know, it's very difficult.
So it's another one of those opening assumptions that needs to be accepted.
Yeah.
Right? We can't have those expectations of them, and maybe we shouldn't.
We shouldn't.
Maybe
We
that's
can't.
not. Maybe that
Can't
shouldn't
do
be
it.
the goal, right? I'll share with you at the end what the kids have said about at least the 100 students or so that I've spoken with, which is not representative. When you ask them, like I asked them what I asked you last week, question 1 was, what do you think the goals of Yom HaZikaron are? Number 2, how do you feel in the Yom HaZikaron ceremony? And admittedly, I interviewed them all in the last few months before this year's Yom HaZikaron ceremony. So some of them said, wait, what do we do at Yom HaZikaron? And then once I said, well, oh, yes, okay. And then they were back in there. And then my third question was, how do you feel as a Jew in the Yom HaZikaron ceremony? And many of them said, what do you mean? As a Jew? Who asks me that, right? And then you mean as a Zionist? I said, I don't know, do you have to choose? Right? In this school, actually, Zionism and Judaism are very much together. But how did you feel as a Jew? And I'll share with you what they said. Their answers were very different than when they said how they feel in general. And keeping you in suspense. I want to just share with you one few more thoughts about why I came to this topic. I'm going to show you some clips, and then we're going to talk about what we saw. I think I mentioned that story last week about being 14 and watching all of our pieces of paper on Erev Tisha B'Av being burned. I'm the product of that story aside. I'm the product of an incredible education from many wonderful institutions. I'm also the product of a B'nai Akiva education. I'm a fervent Zionist. I've spent many summers, I'm like reading my resume, but many summers with my children in Israel with the explicit articulated goal between my husband and I of helping our kids forge a very strong emotional relationship to Israel. We wanted them, we hoped, and it worked, that they would fall in love with the country. And I also want them to feel equipped to have a grown-up relationship eventually with Israel. And what that means is knowing what Israel really is, knowing who Israelis really are to the extent that you can as a popping in, popping out person, know what Israeli society grapples with. But that question about how to feel responsible, my greatest hope and desire is that my kids would orient their lives towards being able to help the Jewish people more broadly, with Israel being a very important piece of that. So the reason why I came to study this particular question was 1 year I followed one of my kids into the Yom HaZikaron ceremony in the academy. And I was just curious about what it would look like. I wanted to know how to talk to her about it later that night. I assumed it would be intense, but I actually had no idea how intense it was. And what I saw that morning, this was a bunch of years ago, for one, what I noticed is that everywhere you looked in the auditorium, there was something going on. There was a video, there was a picture, there were flags, there were images, there were faces. And if a kid was looking for a bit of a sensory break, there was no sensory break. That was the first thing I noticed. The second thing I noticed, that it happened to be that year, the subject was the kidnapped boys, and it was right after the summer. It was the Yom HaZikaron after the summer when they had been killed. And they retold the story really with the purpose of highlighting the unity that we all felt and the tefillah that was shared around the world. But in order to achieve that, I would say, well-articulated affective goal, They played lots of videos from the mothers in the summer before the boys were found, the very heartbreaking videos that I would assume many people in that audience had watched and had just lived through. And I found myself asking myself throughout that ceremony, why are they doing this to these kids? Now, if you say, go back to my chart, if the goal is to feel sad, check. There's no way a kid could walk out of there and not feel very sad. If the goal is to help them feel pride they were able to defend ourselves, X. I don't think that came out. But what I started to ask was, A, do we know what our emotional goals are? And B, are we checking for unintended extra outcomes? Typical kids in a situation like that, they feel very sad, they walk away. A couple of hours later, they're back to usual business. But first of all, what about kids who are not experiencing things in typical ways? Are we accounting for them? And what really energized me was not that question, but I was very influenced by Rabbi Harkstark's paper in our Siach group, which was really saying what I've been saying in implicit ways all along. As diaspora Jews, we need to start coming up with other ways of understanding why we're here. What do I mean by that? Right now, it feels like the articulated options in our community are aspire to make Aliyah or stay here and feel guilty. Is that a very crass generalization? Those are the things we can actually say out loud. But inside, I mean, we in the school, I would say, we very much promote or support or encourage Aliyah, but it's not the only way to be a successful Jew, right? And we very much believe that being here is important and we're proud, and even theologically, Rabbi Harkstark has argued, theologically we can understand the place of a diaspora Jew. If that's true, should Yom HaZikaron reinforce Aliyah or guilt, or should Yom HaZikaron also create other options? Okay. Are we ready to show a little bit of the clips? Now I want to just say this, that the ceremonies are an hour long. We don't have that much time. I took very little bits and pieces, and I'm showing you the bits and pieces that I'm using towards the argument of one of the unintended consequences that I think our ceremonies can create. So it might feel a little bit choppy. It will feel choppy. I'm framing it that way. You'll see what you'll see, and then afterwards I'll tell you why I made those selections. I will just say that in terms of the overarching plan of this ceremony that we're looking at, this is from 2015. The program was introduced by an Aliyah-bound senior. We're going to see that. We're going to see an Israeli soldier speak. We're skipping lots of punctuations by the choir, but we're going to see one example of a song from the choir. Another Israeli student introduces a soldier. We're going to see just the introduction to that soldier and not his speech. And then at the very end, as is in every Yom HaZikaron ceremony at the school, there's Yizkor, there's lighting of the candle, recitation of Tehillim, Mishaberach for Israeli soldiers, and then we leave with? Okay.
No El Malarachi?
Yes, sorry, that's what I meant by the Yizkor. Yeah.
This past summer, Shaked Naftalovich and I worked as counselors together in the same bunk at Mosheva Ba'ir. Before the counselors arrived each day, the staff gathered together to daven shacharit, say Tehillim, and listen for news of the missing boys. Each day, we were heartbroken to hear that there was nothing to hear. The second week of camp, our Eidah had a trip. We, along with 8 or 9 other staff members, accompanied about 60 8- and 9-year-olds to see an interactive show and play in the arcade. We were up and down, throwing rubber chickens, pieing other counselors in the face, getting slimed. Neither of us were checking our phones. At the end of the show, our Rosh Eidah told us to bring our kids over to the snacks and then meet him in the corner of the room. I was expecting him to give us an update about the camp day, tell us that maybe the bus was running late, or we were finishing up early and needed to plan an activity for when we got back to camp. But then he turned to us and said, "The bodies of the boys were found." I think he kept talking, but I didn't hear a thing. Shaked and I looked at each other, and we both had tears in our eyes. I later noticed that one of the male counselors, an Israeli friend of my brother, was no longer in the room. I went looking for him and found him outside. He had lived in the same town as Gilad Sha'ar before he came to America. While his family was here on Shlichut, Gilad's family was renting house. They also gave us the procedure for how to discuss it with the campers. Our campers were so young, and it's hard to know what to say and when to say it. We were told that if our campers were to say anything to us, we were to tell them that there were people for them to talk to, but it's not something that we're going to discuss during the camp day. But the truth is, it's not just hard to discuss these things with our campers. It's hard to discuss these things with our peers and our parents and our teachers too. It's never been easy, and it won't get any easier. Today is a day where we knock down our comfort barriers and we try to talk about it anyway. Yom HaZikaron is a day dedicated to commemorating fallen soldiers and victims of terror. In the past 67 years, there have been 2,526 victims of terror and 23,320 IDF soldiers who lost their lives defending Israel. In total, there have been 25,846 people who lost their lives for our country and our nation. Just like we did last week on Yom HaShoah and every year on Yom HaZikaron, in a moment we are going to watch a video and hear the siren that sounds in Israel on Yom HaZikaron. When you hear the siren commemorating all those who have been lost, please rise for a moment of silence. This year at SAR, we are focusing on the events from this past summer. Throughout our program today, we will be hearing from and about soldiers and victims of terror from the operation in Gaza to Eitan. SAR would like to express our gratitude to stand with us for bringing us heroes of Israel, soldiers who have served and protected our precious homeland. Lital, a journalist and anchor for a news website in Israel, was born in Ashkelon and served as a combat soldier in the IDF. Lital is proud of her service and strongly believes that such service is falsely portrayed in media around the world. Lital considers it a duty and an honor to contribute whatever she can to her country, which led her to choose service in the Border Police Unit. She served at checkpoints, stations aimed at thwarting terrorist attacks, which is a position usually held by male IDF soldiers. Please join me in welcoming Lital.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much for having us. I had to step outside because the moment that the songs started, I just started crying. It was very emotional for me, and I didn't really want to embarrass myself, so decided I'm going to stay out and at the songs part, and then come back when I will need to start speaking. So my name is Lital. I live in Tel Aviv. I work, I'm a reservist. I work as a journalist and a news anchor for a news website in Israel. And I'm doing this tour for Stand With Us. It's an organization educating about Israel. It's very a special day for me to be able to speak during our Memorial Day. As you all know, it's a very it's basically the saddest day in Israel, and I think I'm very privileged to be able to speak in behalf of our people, of our country, and to share my stories from the army. And I think it's also a unique time for us. This period of time between Holocaust Day and Memorial Day, the fact that we were born for a state, that we were born I was born to a situation where I already had a state, but but my grandparents didn't, and I think it's something that we always need to take into consideration and never take it for granted, because unfortunately we're still fighting our war of independence, and we still have to have an army to guard us. And when I joined the army, it was pretty clear to me I wanted to do.
Okay, I'm going to stop there for a minute. By the way, I've had to watch these so many times. It's so sad. It's just very hard. It's very hard now to talk about this. But if you could, what did you see in terms of the questions we've been talking about? What are the messages already from the first 6 minutes of the ceremony that are being set up? Put yourself in the head of a high school student sitting in the auditorium watching the introduction by a student who I told you at that time she was Aliyah bound. She actually is still in Israel, talking about her experiences in the summer and the difficulty of engaging with this topic, watching the siren, and then the brief introduction of the Israeli soldier. Anything that you notice?
It's an emotional moment.
Yeah, and this is only 6 minutes. It keeps going. Which piece in particular?
I mean, I think it's everything combined. Certainly the siren, there's something very intense about that. I think everybody relates to that. It's almost like the shofar going off in your head. It's just incredible. And everybody's stopping, and that's a collective moment of feeling this global unity. Everyone coming together. It's very much so.
Right.
So, also the personal story of somebody and their connection to it is very potent.
The soldier.
The soldier, the student, it's impacted in different ways,
Mm-hmm.
different experiences to different people, but it all comes under this umbrella of Yom HaZikaron.
Right. Yeah. What are you thinking?
I also think that then introducing a living, breathing, healthy, vital young woman who is actually has been on the front line, that it also gives you that connection to pride and recognizing heroes, and there's an element of hope in the person who still exists. So I thought that balance was really a positive balance.
Yeah, it's very true, actually. Whenever soldiers go on the stage on Yom HaZikaron, there's a kind of collective sigh and a stand-in, right? And there's life in the face of death. But there's also, I think you're right, it does access for sure that goal of, you see a girl and later you'll see a boy if we watch it who gets in front of the stage who's not that different in age from the students in the group, and to say, look, I'm Yisrael Chai. Like, we're defending ourselves, we're mourning, and we're also proud today. Yeah, what else?
I was struck by, and this just to me pointed out the difference between Yom HaZikaron in Israel and here, that the soldier said that it's the saddest day of Israel in Israel, because I don't, in my yeshiva education, we were taught to think that Tisha B'Av is the saddest day of the Jewish calendar, and then of course you have Yom HaShoah. So it's just, it was like, wow, I guess you're right, or just like, that was the first time I had heard that, and I don't know that's the experience of here, kids in the Gola here.
Yeah, great. And by the way, I don't think she said the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, did
So
she?
she said the saddest day in Israel.
In Israel,
Yeah.
okay? So let's just take notice of that,
Yeah.
yeah.
I was gonna say that's a very big difference, because I also did yeshiva education. There was no Yom HaZikaron when I was in yeshiva. So, but historically, the Jewish people it still would be Tisha B'Av. But when you're in Israel, I know like every year, I make an effort to look for a YouTube of that siren. Because having been there and being stopped in the middle of the road and getting out, or being on a bus, and you see people struggling to everyone stand in an aisle.
Yeah,
Parents.
yeah. So what we see already, and this is what I would call the successful part of the program, and there are many, right? And by the way, when I speak to students, I keep talking to students. The first round of what they say, always, their memory of Yom HaZikaron is, like you said, emotional wallop. I really felt connected to Israel on Yom HaZikaron. I felt very sad. I felt very grateful. I felt very appreciative. All those things that we would expect, that we would hope, and we can say, yes, they do feel those things based on a ceremony, which is not a small thing. Because, like you pointed out, they're not close to the sacrifices. They don't have the first-hand experiences. Okay, and here comes on the other hand. What I started to see when I looked at this more closely, and please push back on me, okay? I can see already, right? But one of the things I think is happening in creating even the 3 elements that we saw is in an attempt to create closeness, which is what we're trying to do, an attempt to bring them closer to the experience. I'm afraid that we are inadvertently creating distance. So what do I mean? Number one, all the people who speak at Yom HaZikaron ceremonies, and this is not by design, it's by who volunteers. But that tells you something. All the kids who volunteer, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, are kids who have decided to move to Israel. Or kids who are Israeli born. So the kids who get up there and the kids who are part of Yom HaZikaron, which is, and Yom HaAtzmaut, are the most public days where we celebrate our relationship to Israel. An inadvertent message is to be really close to Israel. And maybe you're going to say, well, duh, obviously, but I don't know that it's so obvious. The way to feel really close to Israel is to plan to move there. The second thing that I think happens, and I'm sorry if this is hard to hear about the siren, but I'm afraid that when you watch a video of the siren, and you watch Israelis watching the siren, if you've been there, then it's evoking something for you. But if you've never been there, which is most of the kids in the school have not been there in Yom HaZikaron, watching Israelis listen to the siren in a kind of inadvertent way creates distance again. Because you are not having, what are you going to do? You're not there. We can't bring them there. That's not our goal. But you are, okay, and this might sound too fancy, but I actually think it's true. You're creating an inadvertent distance between the kids and Israel. What you're inscribing for them through that is that they're outsiders. They're watching. They're peering in. They're watching. You're going to push back 1 second. They're watching Israelis have an unmediated experience. And the question is, maybe kids don't think any of these things that I'm saying, and all they feel are the emotional impact that you expressed, Deborah, right? That it's really, oh my God. Or if they've heard about it, they get to see it, and I was very emotional just watching it again, right? You're transported somewhere. But it might have the extra effect of creating, you're not there. And in fact, even if this was from this year, in 2015, which it wasn't, by the time we're experiencing Yom HaZikaron, it's almost over in Israel, right? So we can't do anything about that. That's how it is. But it's one of those incredibly strange dissonances that we have, right? Then we're fully in the day and Israelis are already in Yom HaZikaron. And the third thing I want to say, and then push back, is that when the Israeli got up and she said, I just had to collect myself and come out for a minute. And then she said, I want you to know this is the saddest day. What I think she's also doing, and if we have time we'll see the other soldier, is that they're in a way performing sadness for the students because they anticipate, and this is not strange, these Israeli soldiers are being brought by an organization that's coming to teach American kids about Israel. Our kids are not really the intended audience of that organization, but they're showcasing or showing American kids, this is what this day is. This is a sad day. I need to collect myself. I need to show you, do you understand what I'm saying? Is this too out there? Right? I need to show you what it feels like to be so dislocated on this day because the understanding is you don't have that unmediated access. So 3 things we saw already are explicitly created in order to achieve a sense of closeness and to bring our students closer to Israel, so to speak. But can we do that? Can we achieve that? Can we aim for that without, and this is the part that on the second round of kids' interviews, they often will say things like, I feel really close and connected, but I also feel really judged. I know it's secret, and it breaks my heart. But if an Israeli comes and says, this is what the day is, and I'll show you some more clips, then you could end up feeling, I don't know what the day is. I'm not ready to go to the army. I can't do it. I'm too scared, or it's not, my parents would never let me anyhow, or for all the other reasons why many students in the school don't choose. So then what happens to me in Yom HaZikaron? Am I in or am I out? Is it my story? Am I not part of the story? Okay, I'll stop talking. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say the other, not to throw in another whole conversation, but we haven't even talked about Memorial Day in the United States. I mean, we are U.S. citizens, and Memorial Day for most of these kids is a barbecue and a sail. I think that there's a unique experience that happens in Israel, and maybe there are a few other countries in the world, small countries, where they have something like this. But this is about the value of life in a small country where they feel it so intensely. The kids hear it, they don't connect to it in that way because it's not their personal experience. And they're also, there's a little bit of, this is how it is. This is how we were raised. This is our approach. I mean, if we had a real Memorial Day service in this country, we'd be pretty sad. There's that piece too, that element also that.
Right. So what's interesting, by the way, Deborah, because many people in America do have a real Memorial Day service, and I get nervous when it's true, in our community, most of us don't have, but members of our community have made clear that there are Jewish service people, and if even not, we should be more attentive. But you're right that when we're trying to create this experience for them on Yom HaZikaron, we don't have what to work with in terms of their analogs. And so what I end up hearing sometimes is, listen, on your Memorial Day, it's a barbecue, and at the beginning of summer, what do you know? Again, does that help kids come closer, or does that make you feel, actually, my life is heartless or something, or pathetic, or materialistic, or, right? And I don't think that's what we want to, I don't think that's what we think is true, and I don't think that's what we want them necessarily to feel. I want to say one more thing. Yesterday, Rabbi Weiss came here to speak to the seniors. It was like breathtaking, as he always is when he speaks to students. But he talked about his grandchildren in the Army, and the entire message to the students can be summed up as, be a giver, not a taker, and figure out how you're going to make a difference for the Jewish people. I don't care how, find it. That was his main takeaway. And he started talking about his grandchildren, 3 of whom already have served in the Army. And he started to talk about the sacrifices they have made and the different units. And I started to feel that, oh no, it's going in that, now the kids are going to feel bad. And then he said, if I was the president of the United States, the first thing I would do is encourage American high school seniors to devote a year of service. Go out into the poor communities, find a way to enrich this great country. And I thought, wow, that was amazing, because his speech was, number one, making the kids realize what their peers are sacrificing, gain an appreciation, perhaps inspire some kids to join the Army. And yet not alienate everybody else and say, you have an opportunity to be inspired by your peers. Don't just feel guilty. Don't feel less than. You don't have to feel like an outsider and inferior. You actually we can learn from your Israeli peers. We need to be like that. Right? So how can we build a culture of appreciation for and inspiration from, and not a less than? Yeah.
We can't build the same culture. I mean, it's impossible. Everybody in the Israeli army, so to speak, serves in the army, like 90%, all the kids. It's a unifying experience for all Israel. It unites the whole country together. And we don't have that. Our Memorial Day, we have this volunteer army that we don't know anybody who's a soldier. The Southerners might be soldiers, but we're not anymore. So we can't possibly equate with that.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. I don't think we could possibly create Israel. I wasn't making that suggestion. No,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that part of where this argument is taking me is to think in more creative, productive ways of helping our students learn from Israelis and help us be available to be learning agents for Israelis. This partnership we keep talking about, this Klal Yisrael, this kind of Jewish peoplehood, which maybe you could say to me in the end, that's very nice, Tammy, I sign on to that, but Yom HaZikaron is not the day for that. Like, maybe do that some other time, maybe make a unit about that, find another way to build partnership. But Yom HaZikaron is the sacred day only to feel sad about Israeli losses. And I would accept that, right? But what I'm suggesting possibly, and with hesitance, is that maybe Yom HaZikaron doesn't have to be safeguarded from the partnership lesson. Maybe Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, I'm getting there in a minute, could be actually a day where we invigorate both our emotional attachment to Israel, our undying commitment to the state of Israel, and our full-bodied sense of responsibility for the Jewish people. So let me tell you one thing about Yom HaAtzmaut. Yom HaAtzmaut we do really well here also. We have now, in the last couple of years, in the morning after the Tefillah Chagigit, wherever we sing Hallel together, and we have a nice Chagiga, and we dance. Then we come into the auditorium, and the kids, the Hebrew department runs this, they call it Kochav Nolad, where kids learn contemporary Israeli songs, and they perform, and they have a contest, and the kids vote, and it's great fun, and they learn lots of Hebrew fluency from singing those songs. And then at the end, we have a ceremony. It's a quick ceremony, but lots of candle lighting. People come up on stage and like the torches that they light in Israel on Yom HaAtzmaut, kids and faculty members who are planning to go to Israel, usually not to learn, because that's many kids, but kids who are going to fight in the army, or faculty who are making Aliyah or returning, get up and light a candle and say a beautiful speech about why they've chosen to do this. Now that's beautiful and gorgeous, and one student even said to me, when he said that Yom HaZikaron is like a very impactful day, he said, I want to go to the army after graduation. This is a junior. And he said, and I kind of want to be that guy on the stage. Now, he was joking in a certain way. He wasn't saying the reason why he wants to make Aliyah is to be the... But he also wasn't joking. And we have, I would say, explicitly, implicitly promoted again that the way to feel really connected to Israel and show your commitment is option number one. And the only option is to move to Israel. So this year I was thinking, in light of this paper, what if on Yom HaAtzmaut, in addition to people who are going to serve in the army, kids who have been participants in partnership type programs would get on the stage. So for example, there are many students in our school who have, not many, maybe 3 or 4, who have gone to the Technion and have participated in an engineering competition, robotics, and they actually were successful. I think they were the only American team, Mashu Kazeh, right? What if one of those kids got on the stage and said, this is what it was like to represent America in Israel, and to talk about, I don't know, for 2 sentences, to be part of this program? Or a kid who goes to Chidon HaTanakh. Or another student shared with me that she's part of a UJA-funded teen action group of Israeli and American kids where they talk about joint issues that they're trying to raise. The list goes on and on of actually other models.
A shaliach.
A shaliach. Well, yes, but that comes back to, the only way to feel committed is to move there. What I'm trying to say is that our community is actually a lot richer and a lot more vibrant and a lot more creative about what it means to be fully committed to and participants in a vibrant relationship with Israel. And Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut are the 2 most public days. There are those ceremonies. There's the time where our messages are crystal clear. It's the days that the kids remember. It's the days that they come back to when they talk about why they chose to move to Israel or why they chose to do X, Y, or Z. They say, I remember that feeling on Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. So it is our greatest opportunity, in a way, to showcase the values and the messages that we think are most important for them. Emotional attachment, 100%. Sadness and appreciation of sacrifice, 100%. But number 1, what else needs to be in there? Number 2, can we be more careful not to overdo it on the emotional wallop so that kids become, overcome by their sadness, and as some kids have reported to me, they feel very small, in that sadness, and not as actors or agents are able to do something with it. And how can we help them? This is really it. How can we help them feel as if this story that we're telling on Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut is their story? It's their story, right? Because if the worst case scenario, I would say, as a religious Zionist living in America, is for students to feel every year on Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut like that soldier started to intimate. We're living during this time between Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. It's the story, it's the updated story of the Exodus narrative. And you guys sitting in the auditorium, you're not in that story. You're not a part of it. I need to tell you about it, I need to show you about it because I want to educate you, but you're not in that story. How can we, with full acceptance of our lack of participation in aspects of the story, right? That goes without saying. We are not making the sacrifices. We have not been fighting in those words, but we are full participants in the overarching narrative of the Jewish people, and we so desperately want to figure out how to do that together with Israel. So Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut, if we do it well, if we do it carefully, if we do it responsibly, can both emotionally impact our kids and also, in the long run, embolden them to become the kinds of Jews and Zionists that we're hoping that they will become. Yes?
I'm struck by the fact that since the 1970s, we don't have a draft, any compulsory draft in the United States, as they do in Israel. But polls continually indicate that a majority of Americans would support, would be in favor of an option of community service, compulsory, instead of a draft. And of course, in Israel, at least for women, there is an option.
Right, and that was exactly what Rabbi Weiss was talking about. Could we use the concept of shirut le'umi, right, of really giving of oneself and serving beyond, right? That's our greatest pedagogical challenge actually with kids, is to help them see the power beyond themselves. First, to see who they are, and then see that there is a world beyond and how they can contribute to it. Yeah.
I think also that our history is the history of powerless people, and that sort of goes back to the whole notion of the Seder and the story. And we've sort of been a people of survivors. That's sort of always been our mentality, which is perfectly great. We've survived, but I think in 1948 there was a seismic shift in our power versus our powerlessness in the establishment of the state of Israel. I think that that's a significant thing, and we still kind of, I don't want to say wallow, that's the wrong word, but we still kind of sit in that sort of survivor mentality. I don't mean survivor like helpless survivor, I mean sort of managing to get past our struggles.
Yeah.
But the state of Israel is really about having power, and what do you do with that power? And that's really where it should shift to. That's really where it should head to.
That's exactly, that's it. That's totally it. It feels to me a lot like we're living during that time where as a community we're learning how to make that transition.
Yeah.
And for some people it's harder than for others, or for some institutions or groups or what have you, but we are uncomfortable with power also. We're not used to it. And it comes with a lot of other stuff that...
And our laws tell us to be careful.
Right. And it's almost like, well, that's such a great siyum, because where we started was telling the story of our emergence from power towards freedom. And what you're really suggesting is that if we need to figure out how to accommodate our new experiences within that frame. We're not a different people. We don't have a different God. We don't have a different story. It takes a new form now. And as we've seen, the story is elastic enough to include our new experiences. But Higanu, we have to be ready for it and embrace it.
Yeah, well,
Okay, you get the last word.
I just want to mention that right now the American community and the Israeli community are two strong Jewish communities. And we've had that before. When we were in Babylon and Israel,
Right.
there were two major places and they interacted very well and each one contributed.
Yep.
So we can't feel that bad that we're not in Israel because we're in Babylon.
Right.
So we still have God put us here and the combination was stronger than either one of us alone.
Okay, so
It's a
now you're ready
golden age
to
here.
watch Rabbi Harkstark's class, because that's what he spoke about in his diaspora.
Oh, yeah?
Last year, right? I want to say last year. To be continued, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yes, co-op.
That is so hard.
Consider not necessarily changing 2 minutes, but having
Having
some
one.
time in a day, they own 2 minutes.
We do that on Yom HaShoah. We do have a...